After the First World War, the map of Europe was redrawn, and in the smoke of collapsing empires, Romania emerged transformed. Once a modest kingdom, it suddenly stood twice its former size. The dream of a greater Romania, whispered by generations, had finally come true. But dreams achieved in turmoil often come with shadows. The Austro-Hungarian Empire crumbled. The Russian Empire fell to revolution. And from their ruins, Romania claimed lands rich in history, culture, and pride. For a brief moment, it seemed like destiny had chosen Romania for greatness. Yet geography is never just lines on a map. It's people, memories, and tensions buried deep beneath the soil. The new territories were far from uniform. Romanians found themselves sharing streets, borders, and power with Hungarians, Bulgarians, Ukrainians, Jews, Germans, Romani, and others. In some regions, Romanians were suddenly the minority in their own greater nation. And while politicians celebrated the triumph, a quiet storm gathered. Neighbors watched jealously. Old rivalries stirred. What appeared to be Romania's victory was also a fragile foundation, one built not solely by triumph, but by the downfall of others. Greater Romania had risen, but the seeds of future conflict were already planted, waiting to erupt. But greatness, once claimed, demands defending. And Romania soon discovered that expansion was not the end of its struggle. It was only the beginning. The dust had barely settled when the problems surfaced. In Transylvania, Hungarian voices demanded the land be returned. In the south, Bulgaria nursed its wounds and looked toward southern Dobruja. To the east, the Soviet Union watched Bessarabia with cold, hungry eyes. Borders that had once been lines on a map became scars, open, delicate, and vulnerable. Inside the new Romania, the challenge was even deeper. The kingdom now held millions who did not speak Romanian, did not pray like Romanians, and did not see the Romanian crown as their own. Streets echoed in many languages. Tension simmered in markets, in schools, in city halls. Minorities feared assimilation. Romanians feared division. National pride soared, yet anxiety crept into the national soul. How do you build unity from fragments? How do you govern a nation forged in the ruins of empires? As neighbors circled and distrust grew at home, Romania stood at a crossroads. It had won land, but would it win peace? Would these new borders hold, or would they become the fault line of a future catastrophe? The fragile empire of hope now balanced on a razor's edge. And the world was about to change again. Forever. Facing a future clouded by uncertainty, Romania turned to diplomacy, and to alliances it hoped would shield its fragile greatness. If force alone could not secure its borders, then partnerships must. Bucharest moved quickly. It joined the League of Nations, believing global cooperation could guarantee peace. It embraced France, seeing Paris as the anchor of security in Eastern Europe. New friendships formed with Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Yugoslavia, binding Romania into defensive pacts, an iron ring meant to guard against Hungary's ambitions and the silent threat of the Soviet East. For a moment, hope returned. Maps were drawn, treaties signed, and diplomats shook hands with confident smiles. Romania believed it had found safety in unity, but alliances are only as strong as the nations behind them. And the world was shifting again. Germany rose from its defeat, fueled by rage and ambition. The Soviet Union rebuilt under iron rule. France, Romania's greatest protector, began to falter, its voice weakening against the sound of marching armies and clashing ideologies. The fortress of alliances Romania relied upon was cracking. A storm was gathering over Europe, darker and more violent than anything before. And Romania, still healing, still learning to stand as a greater nation, found itself once again staring into the unknown. The peace it fought so hard to preserve was slipping away. one tremor at a time. As Europe trembled, internal shadows rose within Romania. The nation's greatest threat was no longer just abroad. It was growing from within. King Carol II, returning to the throne in 1930, promised stability. But power has a way of corrupting even noble intentions. Determined to tighten his grip, he dissolved freedoms, weakened parliament, and built a royal dictatorship brick by brick. Romania, desperate for unity, instead became a battleground of ambition and ideology. And into this fragile landscape marched a darker force, the Iron Guard. Born in universities, fueled by fanatic nationalism and hatred, they believed Romania's survival demanded purification. To them, minorities, especially Jews, were not citizens but enemies. Their rhetoric was fire. Their loyalty was to blood, land, and vengeance. Where the king sought authority, the Iron Guard sought revolution. Two visions collided, one authoritarian, the other apocalyptic. Clashes erupted, assassinations shook the government. Romania was no longer fighting only foreign fears, it was tearing at itself from the inside. A nation that once dreamed of unity now battled its own soul. And as these fires burned, the world outside marched toward war. The storm was coming, and Romania, torn between crown and fanaticism, stood dangerously unready for what was about to arrive. When war finally erupted in Europe, Romania tried to stand still, caught between giants, balancing on a blade. Neutrality, the leaders hoped, would shield the country from catastrophe. But neutrality is fragile when history begins to move at full speed. The fall of France in 1940 shattered that hope. Overnight, Romania's most trusted protector collapsed beneath the German Blitz. The League of Nations, once believed to be a shield, proved powerless. Suddenly, Romania was alone, surrounded by hungry neighbors and rising empires. Sensing weakness, the Soviet Union struck first, demanding Bessarabia and northern Bukovina. With German pressure and no allies left to call, Romania surrendered the lands. Then came Hungary, claiming Transylvania. Bulgaria followed, demanding Dobruja. Piece by piece, the dream of Greater Romania began to crumble. The public roared with anger, soldiers felt betrayed, and King Carol II, the man who once promised strength, now looked helpless, despised by his people, abandoned by friends, cornered by enemies. In desperation, he turned toward Germany, hoping Hitler's favor could save what remained. But power granted by dictatorships always comes with a price. Romania, once a nation reborn in victory, now bled from every border, and a reckoning was approaching from within. Cornered by loss and humiliation, Romania's crisis reached its breaking point. With territory slipping away and rage flooding the streets, the nation demanded a savior, and fate delivered a soldier. General Ion Antonescu stepped forward, promising strength where the king had failed. In September 1940, crowds filled Bucharest, demanding change. Under crushing pressure, King Carol II abdicated and fled into exile, leaving behind a kingdom on the edge and a legacy covered in bitterness. Antonescu seized power, not alone, but alongside the Iron Guard, whose fanaticism burned hotter than ever. Together, they proclaimed a national legionary state, vowing rebirth through iron discipline and nationalist zeal. But alliances built on hatred crumble quickly. The Iron Guard, drunk on vengeance, unleashed chaos, looting, executions, terror. Their enemies vanished in the night. Their violence stained city streets. Even fellow Romanians were hunted if they stood in the way. Antonescu, a man obsessed with order and discipline, watched the movement spiral into anarchy. Within months, the alliance shattered. In January 1941, Bucharest erupted in rebellion, a violent purge, a struggle for control. Antonescu crushed the Iron Guard, ending their blood-soaked uprising. He had defeated the extremists, yet Romania did not escape brutality. For Antonescu held his own ruthless vision. and the war's darkest days still lay ahead. With the Iron Guard broken and the streets quiet once more, General Antonescu stood as the unchallenged ruler of Romania. But peace did not return, only a colder, more calculated darkness. Antonescu had removed the wild fury of the extremists, yet he embraced their core belief that Romania's future required cleansing and conquest. Now, his gaze turned outward, toward the vast lands lost to the east and the rising star of Adolf Hitler. Hitler needed oil, and Romania had it. Antonescu needed power, and Hitler offered it. Thus, a pact was forged, not out of loyalty, but out of desperate ambition and shared ideology. In June 1941, when Germany launched its titanic crusade against the Soviet Union, Romania marched beside it. Nearly 1 million Romanian soldiers, more than any other Axis ally, crossed the Prut River, believing they were reclaiming honor, territory, destiny itself. And as they advanced, the regime unleashed terror behind the front. Jewish families from Bessarabia, Bukovina, and beyond were rounded up, deported, murdered. It was not merely Nazi pressure, it was Romanian will, a genocide born of politics, fear, and hatred. At first, victories came quickly. Towns fell, flags rose, patriotic cheers filled Bucharest. But war has a cruel habit: triumph at dawn, disaster by dusk. And Romania, now tied to Hitler's fate, marched deeper into a storm from which few nations ever returned unchanged. Romania's early victories glimmered with hope. Reclaimed lands, proud soldiers marching home across the Prut. But war does not care for hope, and the path forward led only into fire. Past the old borders, beyond the dream of liberation, Romania followed Hitler deeper into the Soviet heartland. Odessa, the proud Black Sea fortress, became a graveyard. Romanian troops, brave but ill-supplied, bled in streets filled with smoke and ruin. Victory came, but at a price carved into the bodies of thousands. And when the city fell, vengeance followed. The occupation of Transnistria brought horrors: deportations, starvation, executions. Entire communities vanished in the winter cold. This was not simply Germany's war of hate. Romania carried out its own brutal vision. In the name of security, in the name of nation, in the name of a future forged in fear. Yet even as the nation pushed forward, storm clouds gathered ahead. The Red Army was not broken, it was awakening. Factories roared east of the Urals, Soviet steel and resolve thickened with every mile. Romania had crossed its Rubicon. There was no turning back, no safe retreat. As winter closed its fist around the Eastern Front, one truth became unavoidable. What began as a crusade to reclaim lost glory was transforming into a desperate struggle for survival. One march, one battle, one grave at a time. Then came Stalingrad, the turning point not just of the war, but of Romania's fate. Here, in the icy ruins along the Volga, destiny shattered. Romanian soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder with the Wehrmacht, but they were outmatched, outgunned, and unprepared for the fury that awaited. Their winter coats were thin, their anti-tank weapons obsolete. Against Soviet armor, many fought with grenades, makeshift explosives, even bare resolve. When the Red Army struck, it was like a hammer falling on glass. Romanian lines buckled first, not from cowardice, but from desperation. Encircled, cut off, and freezing, entire divisions vanished in catastrophic silence. Units that had marched east with pride now dissolved into snow, metal, and blood. Nearly half of Romania's active army was lost in the white inferno of that winter, and when the survivors staggered home, they brought not triumph, but grief, doubt, and dread. Whispers filled the streets. Germany cannot win. Mothers prayed, families wept, and officers wondered how long the nation could endure a war that was no longer theirs to control. The alliance with Hitler, once a ladder to restored glory, had become a chain, dragging Romania toward ruin. And as the Red Army gathered strength for its next advance, one thing was clear. The storm that had begun far away was now moving toward Romania's very heart. As the war dragged into its later stages, one truth became impossible to ignore. The fate of Ukraine was no longer just a regional conflict. It had become the defining struggle of the 21st century, a contest not only of armies, but of wills, ideologies, and the future world order itself. International alliances tightened. Nations that once hesitated now stepped forward with weapons, intelligence, and financial lifelines. A new Iron Curtain seemed to descend, but this time, the world was watching in real time. Drones buzzed overhead like mechanical ghosts, satellites tracked every movement, and digital warfare raged in the shadows. In Kyiv, Ukraine's spirit remained unbroken. Every speech, every flag raised, every funeral, they carried a message. Freedom is worth the price. Meanwhile, inside the Kremlin, pressure mounted. Economic pain deepened, internal dissent simmered, and global isolation closed in. And yet the battlefield remained unforgiving. Each advance was paid in blood. Each city liberated left behind scars too deep to measure. But amid the darkness, a certainty emerged. Ukraine had already changed the world. The question now was not whether it would stand, but how far it would rise, and who would stand with it when the dust finally settled. In the end, Romania's story in the Second World War is not one of simple heroes or villains, but of a nation trapped in the gears of history. It rose with ambition, stumbled into darkness, and paid a terrible price in blood, land, and dignity. Yet within the ruins came a reckoning, a moment when the country broke free from tyranny and chose a different future. The war scarred Romania, reshaped its borders, and reshaped its soul. But from collapse came survival, and from chaos came rebirth. History remembers nations not only for their mistakes, but for how they rise after falling.